everyone is given the same amount of time, and it's the one thing you can't buy.
Keep going, never quit. The day I think about quitting is, the day you die. Find something hard to do. Every successful person loves doing the hard things, right? It starts with one step. Whether you're running 101 Ironmans or you're running a marathon or you're walking down the street, that journey, however long or small, starts with one step.
Right, it's literally all mental. So I'm curious in terms of like how you can apply that same framework to like business. All right, welcome to the show, Casey Adams. So happy to have you here, man.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, Tim.
Of
Appreciate
course.
it.
And we found out, Casey and I, that we have a ton of mutual friends. This is a much smaller world than you guys think.
Indeed.
So many friends.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I used to live in LA as well, and Casey lives in Marina Del Rey.
Yep.
But would love to just jump right in and learn more about you. Like, you're only 22 years old and you're absolutely crushing it. You've been doing podcast game for 5 years. So take me back to when you were 17. Like, how did you just get the idea when you're basically still in high school to start a podcast?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's so crazy just even thinking back, 5 years, 5.5 hosting the show and just seeing how the medium has changed over the years and how podcasting it has grown. It's so cool because, when I started the show, I didn't think about it as like the podcasting industry. It was just like, hey, I want to use this outlet to connect with people. And what really led to the inspiration for the show was I was born and raised in a small town in Virginia, and growing up, I didn't have any like businessy entrepreneurial friends or family members. And I was an athlete. I played hockey for 10 years. I played lacrosse in high school. And then sophomore year of high school, I was playing football, which played for a couple of years. And I ended up getting injured sophomore year of high school, where I ended up in a neck brace for over 6 months.
Wow.
I was diagnosed with interspinous ligament damage. So this injury, literally, it was the first day of hitting practice, like super amped up for the football season, get injured. And I remember, I go to the doctor the next day after I hurt my neck, and he says, after getting x-rays, you can never play football again. You have to be in a neck brace for 6 months, and you have to really just take it easy, right? Like, your spine is very unstable. And it just led to this 6-month journey of initially depression and not sure what I wanted to do with my time, my life, and just angry at the world, but just slowly but surely shifted to this world of personal development and business and entrepreneurship from the people that I was following out online at the time. And, not to go too in depth yet, but a year of just immersing myself in that space, podcasting just started to appear in terms of what I was listening to. And I just saw it as a great opportunity to share my story, to hopefully connect with people and interview them and learn something at the end of the day.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, that's how what initially led to the idea to start the podcast.
Yeah, I almost feel like those times where you have some sort of like traumatic event or some serious catalyst in your life, those are where you really have time to like sit down and self-reflect to see like what you want to do or like what needs to change.
Totally. I think it's so clear looking back at, like, oh, that moment changed my perspective and my life in a sense. But I think it's so hard for people to recognize like when you're going through something like that, like, because you sometimes get so caught up in what you're dealing with versus how it's transforming you and what you can learn from the situation. And that doesn't mean injuries. That could mean, breakups or, if you're married, divorces, whatever it may be. Just having those moments in life that you can reflect on as a transformative stage. For me, that was, again, like a blessing in disguise. And quite frankly, looking back, I don't know what I would be doing if that didn't occur in my life. And that was when I was 16 in high school. I'm in a neck brace, just have no clue what the future holds. And it was just the domino effect that, we'll get into today that just opened up all these different paths with the right commitment and just dedication to it.
Yeah, 100%. So in terms of, you launched a podcast, basically you're still in high school when you launched a podcast.
Yeah, it was sophomore year of high school.
And tell me more about that. Were you just like filming an episode a week? Like what were you talking about? You're probably just putting it out there, and then I'm guessing friends and family would be your only listeners in the early days.
It was so interesting. So from a timeline perspective, I got injured in like early 2016, and middle of 2016, when I was coming out of my neck brace and like the months prior, I was, following people like Gary Vaynerchuk, Tony Robbins, and like all these different people, entrepreneurs online that were sharing great content. And I remember reading Gary V's book, Crushing It. And the last chapter, if I'm not mistaken, is titled Podcasting. And it was just what podcasting is, why it's an important medium, why you should be spending time on it, like what it can do for your personal brand and how you can meet people through it. And I remember just the epiphany that I had was, wow, I can simply talk on a microphone in this, different format than a YouTube video or something that requires so much high effort and high output, and learn something from people that I want to interview. And that was my motive at the time. It was like, hey, I'm coming from this small town where none of the people that I'm surrounded with, friends at school, you name it, they weren't people that I believe were going to help me level up, right? Like the quote, "You are who you associate with." I wanted to just build my network. And for me, 16 at the time, no relationships. The podcast was just a natural way, in my opinion, to kickstart that. And I remember just interviewing initially friends of mine who I met on social media, like my now business partner or past business partner at Media Kits, Kieran O'Brien. We met on social media. He was one of the first people that I interviewed. And, to the question of like, what was I talking about? Some of the first episodes were like solo episodes where I was talking about my neck injury, talking about building a personal brand on social media, because I was just attempting to do that at the time. Yeah. And then I slowly but surely got into just getting interviews when I could have people on the show. And, looking back, just for context for everyone that's listening, I've done over 400 interviews now, from Larry King to Elon Musk's mom and sister to the founders of Twitch and Netflix. And I would have never imagined just the caliber of guests, but just, how one thing leads to the next. Like you can never predict who you're going to have on the show. You can have a core plan to have them on the show, but looking back and seeing how like, oh, this guest led to this one and this opened up this door, it's just, it creates that network effect. And with, time invested, which for me, 5.5 years, it's blossomed into such a business development tool, brand builder, and something I truly love doing. As you do, like the art of a good conversation and what you can learn within it is just something I'm obsessed with.
Amazing. And so tell me about like the early days in terms of getting your first guest. Like what would you say was your first big, semi-big guest, where it's like, oh wow, I'm not just sitting here filming at home.
I remember there was probably two people that stuck out to me. And just for context, when I started the show, this was 2017, in December 2017. And I had this list of people I wanted to interview, people that I was following. And the first person that really just, I had to take a step back and say, oh my God, I'm interviewing this person, was a guy known as Drama. His name's Chris Drama Pfaff. Do you know Drama?
Yeah. Yep.
Young and Reckless, Robin Big. So if you're, maybe I'm 22, if you're anywhere close to my age, you've probably watched Robin Big growing up.
Yep.
And it was just one of those moments where I remember when I was setting up to interview him, it was just a crazy moment, not only for me, but kind of my whole family. I was still living at home at the time. And, we used to, when I say we, my family and I, two brothers, mom and dad, used to watch those shows together, Robin Big, Ridiculousness. And it was just such a moment where I'm like, wow, I DM'd Drama. He posted a picture of a book and I was like, hey, like, absolutely love that book. Would be such a pleasure to talk about, your story, Young and Reckless, on the podcast, give him a little context on it. He agreed to it. And it was like one DM. Sometimes it takes, 10 different follow-ups to get people.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's just, send a message. And if they're open to the idea of it and you present yourself correctly, you can get a yes. And that was, I think, the 30th episode maybe. But it just sort of made me sit up and say, wow, like you're only one DM away, or you're only one message away from opening up a conversation, having someone on your show. And it just stressed the importance of being obsessed with output, because that's the only reason why, people come on podcasts. Like, yes, you could have people reaching out to you once you've had a show for years, but that's always been my mindset, is like reaching out consistently, following up. And, to your question, that was one of the first people that I was like, wow, that's super cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that just really shows as well, just the power of like social media.
Yeah,
right? Like the
absolutely.
fact that you just grew up in Virginia and were able to just literally send a DM to get like someone you used to watch on TV
Yeah.
is crazy.
And even just thinking back on it, like that DM, if you just break it down and sort of take it back in context, that DM, which led to the podcast, which led to, I was coming out to LA a lot when like senior year of high school, once a month, every other month, going to different networking events. And it led to not only building a great relationship with drama, but we ended up hosting 2 events together, one in 2018, one in 2019 here
Wow.
in LA. We sold like 300 tickets, like, low ticket, affordable. And we had these great networking events where we had speakers like the founder of Revolve, Rob Dyrdek came out and spoke, Robert Greene, just so many incredible people from Drama's network, from my network.
Wow.
After he initially spoke at an event I was hosting in Scottsdale when I was living out there. And it's just, as someone that has a podcast, you understand just how relationships can get expedited in your life from sitting down with someone and like knowing their story, knowing where they come from, knowing who they are. It's just such a powerful thing, in my opinion, that leads to so much more in fruitful relationships. But I think it stresses the importance of just not only the significance of the podcast in my life, but just the art of a quality conversation and how it can lead to more.
Absolutely. And I think I'm sure now you've known after doing 400 interviews or podcast episodes, you probably know so many people now. You've probably built such strong relationships, and it's really just like being genuinely curious about someone's life.
Totally. I mean, Larry King, when I interviewed him, one of the biggest takeaways that I always quote is he says, "I've never learned anything while I was talking." And it just emphasizes this idea of listening and being a good listener. And I think that's just my motto, period, is I love conversations, but whether that's on a podcast or in the street or talking to valet, just being someone that's intentionally listening. It's so easy to be distracted on your phones when you're in conversation or when you're on a walk or when you're on the phone with your family, whatever it is. And I think just having a podcast has allowed that to be such a strong just characteristic that I like to live by, is just intentional listening 24/7. And of course we can all improve in many different ways. But yeah, it's important to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so after high school, you made the decision to, did you go to college?
I did not. So
Yeah.
I graduated 2018, moved out a month later to Arizona.
Wow, straight to Arizona.
Yeah.
What made you decide on that?
So at the time, I was running a media company called Build Your Empire, and my good friend Kieran and our other good friend Jeff, JR Garage, they were both living in Northern Virginia. They graduated high school a year prior to me, and we were all best friends, always traveling together, just to different events and everything. And I remember I made the decision to move to Arizona without ever having been to Arizona. And like Jeff had family out there. My 2 business partners at the media company were living out there. So it just made sense. And we went out there, and that was that. I just made the commitment to moving out there and just took a leap of faith. And looking back, it was such a foundational part of just my career, my adulthood. I moved out at 18, lived in Scottsdale for 2 years, and then now I've been in LA for just over 2 years.
Yeah.
But it feels like so long ago, even though it was only 2.5 years ago, because the amount of just mental growth from 18 to 22, and by not going to college and building companies and Scottsdale, like, I have such a love and appreciation for Scottsdale, and I quite frankly love the city. Like, I was just there a couple weeks ago, and just every time I go back, it feels nostalgic to me.
Yeah.
Even though it was just a very short time that I lived there. But yeah, that's what led to moving out to Arizona.
Nice. Dude, I feel like once life moves fast, like you don't even remember what happens like last year or even like earlier this year.
Yeah.
It's like where was I in January? I don't remember.
Yeah.
So
No, I definitely feel that.
so I want to learn about the early day grind, right? Because I think now everyone sees you with, over 400 episodes and interviewed, some amazing guests, but it wasn't always like that, right? It's the risk you took. It's the hustle. It's being persistent. Tell me more about those early days where it's like you moved to Arizona. What was your day-to-day like in terms of like now that you're going full time on the podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, even like prior to moving to Arizona, there's that, and I think everyone faces it in life, right? Like self-doubt, just why am I moving there, or why am I making that decision, or why am I quitting my job, or why am I like taking this job? And, again, just to reference it, like I grew up in an environment where I had the most loving and supporting parents, two older brothers, and just what I've done just the past 5 years, like hasn't been done in terms of I have no family on the West Coast. I didn't know anyone on the West Coast. And like to make such a, like, in my opinion, from where I come from, like a big jump to move across the country at 18 years old with no backup plan, like, it's a risk. And I feel like at the time I really didn't think about it like that. And it's not that I do now, but even having just the couple years that I do now to reflect, I'm like, wow, like those big decisions that you make that just alter the direction of your life. If I think back of like the daily grind, or however you phrase the question, the podcast was something that it took up a lot of time, and it was one of those things that you have to live and breathe it, no matter what you're doing, if you want it to be successful. Even like reflecting on the journey of Media Kits, right? Like, in my opinion, when you really attach yourself to something and like create your identity around it and obsess over it, that's where you can really like move the needle. And if until you do that, it's, you can have something that you're excited about and passionate about, but once you're committed and all in, that's where I feel like big strides can happen.
Yeah.
But I know for the question, like day-to-day grind, over the years, it's changed a lot, right? From Media Kits, and we raised a round of funding, to building a team, to then just being solo podcaster.
Media Kits, is that separate from your Casey Adams show? Okay.
Media Kits. Okay. It's a tech company I launched in 2021.
Got it.
But like prior to that, it was, just trying so many different things, from Facebook advertising agencies to working with clients to doing podcast sponsorships to just running the show and building my personal brand overall, to throwing different networking masterminds and just trying and being willing to just put myself out there. And I think a lot of young people, if you're 16, 17, 18 years old, that's the biggest thing that I am so happy that I did, is just the willingness to say yes to things, to put yourself out there, to not be afraid, but to just take those leaps of faith. I remember like the first stage I spoke on, I was 16 years old. And this is actually a funny story. The first time I was ever in California, it was January 2017. And prior to that, the first company I started when I was 16, living in Virginia still, was Facebook advertising agency. It was running Facebook ads and managing like Instagram accounts for my chiropractor, my dentist, just local businesses in my area, charging a monthly retainer. And therefore I had some money to be able to hopefully book a plane ticket to California. Prior to that, I've never been on a plane. I'm 16 years old, and I ended up meeting this guy on Instagram who's now a good friend of mine, Caleb Maddox, that's like, hey, I'm speaking at this event in California. You should come out and speak on this like young entrepreneur panel. And to my parents, it sounds crazy. It's like, we've never been to California. You've never been on a plane. Like, what are you talking about? And I remember that, the rejection of being told like you can't be there, when in my eyes at the time, that was the biggest opportunity and thing I needed to do if I wanted to like make progress. I ended up like booking the plane tickets for my dad and I, going downstairs, like telling him, hey, we're going, and going out to San Diego. That's when I met so many just great people that are still in my life today. And it was like, to my point of saying that story of like being willing to put yourself out there, being willing to just, whether that's parents or the world or society, to just trust your gut and to make a decision on that. I think now, just as time goes on, and, again, I'm young, I'm 22, but just seeing and being on my own for the past couple of years, you start to notice like, wow, like that youthful energy that I do still have, but I feel so like changed over the past couple of years in such a great way, that I think to the initial question, like what did the early days look like, is just obsessing over that gut instinct to do more, to put myself out there, and to like make those, at the time, what would feel like the biggest decision, to go to an event or to travel to New York to meet this one person. I just made everything seem so big because it was to me at the time. And I think if you do that, it just opens up so many doors and creates opportunity.
Absolutely. So So you were basically grinding and making money on different businesses essentially while you were getting up the podcast in
Yeah,
Arizona.
mainly Facebook advertising business for like
Yeah.
a good 2 years, like 16, 17, 18,
Dude,
prior to
I feel
living
like that's
out.
like the go-to, right? Like when you're first starting out in
Yeah,
business, like even for me, and obviously mine failed. Like that was one of the first things I tried was social media marketing agency,
yeah,
right? So
absolutely. And it's, you had, it was such a, and still is, like, it's a phenomenal business for anyone that's looking to, go get a handful of clients, charge a monthly retainer, build a skill set, and then you can apply that in so many different areas of your life. Like
exactly.
from Facebook advertising, at the time I was also doing work with like personal brands, managing the personal brands on Facebook, doing viral video campaigns, just like trying different things.
Yeah,
But yeah, I did that for a while for sure.
nice. So when did you decide and maybe you didn't stop your side businesses, but did you basically hit a point where it's like the podcast has now hit traction or momentum, and maybe you got your first sponsor in the podcast, and you're like, I'm gonna go all in on the podcast and stop the agency, or
Yeah.
like where was that inflection point?
Yeah, so when I moved to Arizona, I was still doing podcasts full time, but I was running a company called Build Your Empire, which is a media company. I had two partners that I was also working with at the time in terms of like they were clients. We acquired this Instagram page that had 1 million followers, a lot of entrepreneurial community, and we were running this like entrepreneur house concept, which was very cool. Looking back, and we did it for just over a year and a half, and that was like the events business. So I'm very familiar and experienced with just hosting events, running events. We were, not necessarily, it wasn't like an official annual mastermind, but we were doing quarterly events for, this was 2018 to like early 2020, and the events were in LA, they were in Scottsdale, and that was something that I did for a while. And the podcast was still the main like personal brand thing. But that business, Build Your Empire, was all consuming at the time in terms of like the journey and the stepping stone.
Nice. And so when did you start monetizing your podcast? Did you start getting hit up by sponsors? Did you
Yeah.
start reaching out? Because I'm sure you thought about your podcast as a
Yeah,
business
yeah,
as well.
for sure. The podcast over the years, I'll be the first one to say it, I haven't, yes, it's a monetization opportunity, but for me, and the whole core reason I've hosted the show, and this is kind of like a full circle moment. So when I started the show, there were three core reasons of why, and I kind of mentioned them earlier. One, meeting people, building a network. Two, learning from them. And three, just the business opportunity and the deal flow of, not even deal flow, but just people and the long-term value of building a phenomenal network. And fast forward to 2021, when we were going out to raise capital for Media Kits, like how I view my podcast isn't is in like some of the one-off deals I've done, but in terms of like the bigger picture of what the podcast has allowed me to do.
Yeah.
And like Media Kits, which tech company, easiest way to create a media kit for creators, real-time data and analytics. We raised a round of funding in 2021, $1.5 million. And I would say like 90% of the investors that invested were through the podcast. It's like when you think about,
Wow.
monetization is one thing of like deal flow, but I think about my podcast as in like the next 10, 20 years, like how can I bring the most incredible minds in the world into my world to then create this network where I can help other people, connect the dots, but then like do deals, whether that's in my own ventures or raising a fund or, angel investing, whatever it may be. So like the sponsorships, which I've done, and I could list some brands here and there that I've worked with, but I think what's important to know and how I think about it is in like the much bigger playing ground of like how can you bring value from a business perspective by having a show. For me, it's not the one-off deals, but like how do you get equity in a company when instead of just having them pay you? And there's this company that I'm an advisor of called Callin. It's a social podcasting app that's run by David Sachs, if you're familiar with David, and he has the All In podcast and everything. And we did a deal. I was, doing a lot of my shows on there for a while, just like I call them like post-show interviews. And then last year, I think a brand that I've really enjoyed working with the most is Slack. So last year, I worked with Slack for 3 months last quarter, and it was actually really cool. And I think this is a unique perspective for podcasters to think about where, when you think about like the average CPM for a podcast in terms of like, downloads to how much you're paid. It's typically like $25 per 1,000 downloads. It's like the typical industry standard. How I've always thought about deals is it's, yes, the podcast, but it's like the entire personal brand, like vertically integrated deal stack. Where with Slack, it was, yes, we did some podcast ads, but I did, a couple of different Instagram reels and TikTok stuff and Twitter stuff. But what was the most interesting that I loved and that I continue to think about is I hosted this like live workshop on the Slack LinkedIn page, which has millions of followers, hosted it as like a podcaster, hosted with small business owners. And it was like an hour and a half thing that I did hosting, talking small business. It was during like Small Business Appreciation Day or month. And working with Slack and just being a podcaster, but then using, the talents of, let's say, a hosting or, dealing with panelists, being used in a different light was something I found very cool, and something that how I try to think about deals is like, it's not the one-off podcast, it's the entire vertical integrated brand stack.
Yeah. See, that's amazing, because you're really looking at it in terms of the big picture, right? Yeah, it's not just short-term cash. It's much bigger for you. Like, who knows what other company or what other ventures you do down the line.
Totally. So. Yeah, and I think that's how I think about it so much more now. And I felt that the Media Kits journey of raising capital and a lot of the initial investors coming from the podcast just sort of closed the loop on my thinking, right? Like, it's one thing to think something of like when I'm 17, like, oh, I want to build this so that if I ever want to go raise money or raise a fund because I'm interested in venture capital, like, this is a great way to just build trust, build relationships, and learn a lot about the industries that you want to dive into. Like, before launching a SaaS company, I probably interviewed 50 different SaaS founders, right? And it's just, before I one day launch a venture capital fund, I'll interview 50 different, GPs of funds, and just that's how I use the podcast.
Yeah.
And obviously you build content through that, you build trust, you build relationships, but it's more or less about the podcast directly in terms of like one-off deals and just deal flow as a as a whole.
Wow, that's so smart. I didn't even think about it like that. Because it's like what you said. Wow, you blew my mind there. Because I'm
glad.
Because it's like it's kill two birds with one stone.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So yeah, and I think it's powerful. Like, even just like, if there's any podcasters out there listening, or someone like yourself, like, I think podcasting as a medium, it's grown so much over the years, but you also realize that growing a show is hard. Working with sponsors that actually create lucrative, business opportunity for you is hard. Like, how do you work with your community? How do you build trust? How do you build fans? How do you build people that enjoy the show? But then what's the higher purpose of the show, right? It's not to have the most viewed short form clips. It's not to have the most necessarily downloaded podcasts. Like, what you get from is that, and that, notoriety and, being able to sit down with people, but you get to learn great things. You get to meet great people if you're, of course, doing an interview show. And then that cultivated and compounded, you have this incredible network of people that you get to help figure out ways to help them, maybe connect the dots between people, but then figure out like, what's the bigger business opportunity, right? And I think that a lot of podcasters not only should think about this way, but it's just such a, in my opinion, long-term view on the power of a podcast that I will forever value and think about it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the early days, right? Like, were you just DMing nonstop? Or like, when did you hit that point where it's like, it's started being less manual and you started just getting referrals from, just because you built up such a big base?
Yeah, definitely a lot of DMs, and still is. Like, I've always thought about my show where like, hey, I want to book the people. I want to have the mutual, like, the vested interest in wanting to have the conversation with someone. And yeah, the first 90 days of hosting my show, I had a goal to interview 60 different people. So like, very ambitious, because this is a funny story. Right around the time I was launching my show, K-Swiss, the sneaker brand, they were doing a collaboration with Gary Vaynerchuk. And I remember I was like super like commenting on K-Swiss Instagram and like DMing them, and ended up interviewing the CEO of K-Swiss. And it led to me just getting this, I should say, like the early access of the Gary V001 K-Swiss shoes. And it led to me DMing Gary and saying, oh my God, like, thank you so much for your team sending this out. I just started a podcast. Like, what would it take to get 5 minutes of your time in New York? And he's like, let's do it. Here's, email assistant. And boom, 90 days from then, I had this meeting with Gary Vee. And that was like early 2018. So I
Wow.
sort of set this internal goal of like, okay, I have this meeting with Gary Vee. I want to ask him questions and like, be of value when I come in there for the 5-10 minutes that we have scheduled. So I had made the goal, do 60 interviews. So the pendulum swung in terms of output. It was just nonstop DMing, and I ended up hitting that goal and interviewing so many wonderful people. Like during that time frame, it was Andy Frisella, Ed Milet, it was just drama, all those people that I was initially thinking like, wow, I don't know what I'm going to say, like the nerves, everything. I was just so committed to hitting that. And then once I did, met with Gary, it was just sort of a reconfirming my thoughts on what the show is. And he's just like, hey, like double down. And there's a video somewhere on YouTube where it's like literally like a short 5-10 minute thing. It wasn't an official podcast. And
You met with him in New York.
yeah, his office in New York.
Yeah.
Short, I literally like skipped a day or two of school to go to New York for the day. I'm a senior in high school. And it just reconfirmed my thinking of the show. And, to the question of DMs, like that's all it was, mainly Instagram DMs and, some Twitter here and there, some cold email, but mainly Instagram DMs. And I think more than just a DM asking, but like being strategic, especially when you start building up the momentum, right? Like some people ask me, and I always reference this story because I think it kind of bridges the gap of how to think about it. So I interviewed Rick Ross in 2020 and it was online. And prior to interviewing Rick Ross, I interviewed Robert Greene, who author of the 48 Laws of Power. And before interviewing Rick Ross, I obviously had Robert Greene on. But when I was reaching out to Rick Ross on Instagram, it was 12 million followers. Never thought he'd get back to me. I reached out and said something along the lines of this. I was like, hey Rick Ross, I have a podcast, The Casey Adams Show. It'd be such a pleasure to have you on. I recently had Robert Greene on the show. The show's only 20 minutes. Like, let me know if you're down or let me know if you're interested. And there was a couple things in there and I butchered the message, but it was along those lines. And a couple things that I want to point out that I always try to do when booking guests is, it's good to have a reference point, right? Like, and I knew that that Rick Ross absolutely loved Robert Greene, like favorite author, raved about him publicly on social media. So I told him that just for the context of like, hey, I just interviewed Robert Greene, one of your favorite authors. Told him the time frame, like, hey, it'll be 20, 25 minutes. I wanted to keep it short and sweet. It ended up going over, but it's funny because now there's this clip of Rick Ross saying, and I referenced this because it's a funny story. He's like, you approached me like a boss. You came here, you didn't ask for anything. You just told me this is what it is. This is what you get. Like, boom, let me know. And it took a lot of sending DMs, unsending, sending, unsending, everything. I think there was like 10 interactions with him prior of like a year trying to do it. And I also interviewed he's a part of Bel Air Champagne.
Yeah.
And I interviewed prior to interviewing him as well, the CEO of Sovereign Brands, who runs and like, operates on the back end, all of these different alcohol brands, including Bel Air. So it's just like, before thinking about booking a guest, like how can you be more calculated? Not because you want to go interview people to have that XYZ or person on, but just like, how can you, be interested about their sphere of influence? If you're interested in someone, chances are you're probably interested in the people that they either do business with or that they admire. And that's how I always think about it, right? Like if I want to go interview someone so badly and I'm like, wow, I'd love to have that conversation, I think like, who are they influenced by in their lives? And like, why wouldn't I be curious about them, right? And that kind of what happened with, I haven't interviewed Wiz Khalifa yet. I one day would love to, but
it's gonna happen. You just manifested it right now. It's gonna happen.
Absolutely. But his manager, Will Desanbach, who's a really good friend of mine now. I've always been like super like a big fan of Wiz growing up, and like Taylor Gang, their whole brand that they've built. And I've just I've always been curious about their whole world and how it works and like the journey. Where I interviewed like one of Wiz Khalifa's like good friends, Ludi, who like who's been a part of their crew for a long time. Interviewed him and they really hit it off with him, which then led to interviewing Will, who's the CEO of his record label, Taylor Gang, and just me and Will again like became good friends, hit it off, which led to then when I was raising money for Media Kits, which And we'll dive into that in a bit. But yeah, I just was more so curious to get his perspective on this tool that we were building, because we were going to be working with musicians, and he ended up being an investor, and Wiz was involved. And then Wiz performed at a launch party in 2021, and just the domino effect, like just going back to the podcast, like those are the opportunities that, not that I seek, but that I know happen with compounding, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
22, and to think that, our conversation today and how our relationship will build over the years, like that's what I think about. And like today, meeting you for the first time, being on the show, is my definition of just planting the seed, right? And like, how can you go plant the seeds with quality people that you admire, that you find, that you're curious about, their sphere of influence. And I think that that's how you can just, not only people like say like, oh, like luck, how do you create luck? And I define luck as just planting seeds with the expectation of watering them, right? Like whether that's someone's sick and you send them green juice and just build with them as a human, like that's where I believe just so much greatness can come from, is just focusing on planting those seeds in a genuine, caring way with people in your world. And I think people would be surprised of it, not how much their life can change, but with action and just, yes, knowing when to ask and doing all those things that we get into. It's a very powerful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you've done an amazing job at just building great relationships, right? And I think you've one of the core principles that I really like to see that you basically adopted is this long-term game. And I think like so many people just it's because it's tough, right? It's not easy to think about stuff long term, right? It's easy to think about like the day to day or like the short term stuff. But if you take a long term frame, I feel like it's very tough to fail or lose, right? Especially if you're willing to do something for just many years, or willing to invest time in relationships for many years, you name it.
Yeah. I have a very simple quote that I say all the time. It's keep going, never quit. 4 words. And I say that because like over the years of interviewing people, my biggest takeaway and just sort of analysis from all the people is just, first thing, they just kept going, one step in front of the other every single day, and then simply did not quit. Like it's easy to keep going, but then it's also easy to quit. You can keep taking the steps until you want to quit, and once you quit, you're out of the game. Whether that's by, not committing to your business or whatever it may be. But my whole point in saying that is the keep going, never quit mentality, I think just is simple and, effective, because that's the long game, right?
Yep.
Like the day I think about quitting is, the day you die, right? Just the ability to fall in love with the process, be committed to the long game, in my opinion, is what creates more happiness, what creates more fulfillment, and what creates more just commitment to anything. If you know that you're committed to the long game, right? It's so easy, and you see all on social media, it's so easy to get distracted and, compare yourself and to think about the short game to get certain things in life. But, like even for context, like I'm in a committed relationship for the past 3 years, and like same thing, long game. Like why waste your time on something unless it's for the long game? That's my perspective. That, you just, and this, right? You're older than me. You quickly realize how fast time is. And, like I'm grateful to have both of my parents. They're in their mid 50s. And I just know that this life thing that we're all in and are, can get so stressed about every single day. There's just such a bigger picture of like what's important and what matters that, I don't think there's time to waste on short-term games.
Yeah. Yeah. Time is such a, have you heard of the time billionaire concept?
Yeah. I actually read like a whole thread on it the other day.
Really?
I've heard of it, but then I like read this thread just to relearn it in a sense.
Yeah.
It's like 1 billion seconds is 33 years, I believe.
Yeah.
Around that.
Yeah. We're basically time billionaires, right?
Yeah.
And I think and I love talking about this concept because time is finite. And I believe it's the most valuable thing in the world, because it doesn't matter how rich you are.
Yep.
Everyone is given the same amount of time, and it's the one thing you can't buy. Right. And
Absolutely.
so you can't, like, people who are billionaires but 50 years older than us would probably give away most, if not all, of their money to go back 50 years to be where we are. So
I mean, and I know he's like probably, but all of them, I'm sure, right?
All of
Like,
them.
if you look at an
Right.
85-year-old and say, would you trade every dollar you've ever worked for to be 20? 100% of them would say
100%.
yes.
100%.
And I even just like get the chills thinking about that, because it's, it's such a game of balance of, you know, that's why, in my opinion, like what I just said, like loving the process and the journey is the most important thing, in my opinion, because the time billionaire concept, like it doesn't last forever,
Yeah.
right? It's a dwindling, it's a dwindling number, right?
Yeah.
So I love that concept. Shout out to the time billionaires.
Shout out to the time billionaires.
And even more than that, something that just came to mind is I remember, and this whole concept of time, I think, is such an important discussion, because I remember the first like local event that I went to in my hometown in Richmond, Virginia. It was this real estate conference or event. I had no business being there. I was 15. This was actually before I went to this event in San Diego. 15 years old. I went with a friend of mine in high school, and I remember it was probably a room of 500 people, and they had a phenomenal speaker there. And he asked, who believes that they are the youngest person in the room? Of course, I'm 15, and I look at this room with like 40, 50-year-olds.
Still going through puberty.
Still going through puberty. Yeah. I raise my hand, and there's so many people that raise their hand, probably like mid-20s, early 30s, whatever it may be. And then he's like, if you're over 25, put your hand down. Boom, like half the hands go down. If you're above 20, like 20, put your hand down. Boom. I think there was like one other person in there that was like 20 or 19. And it's like, oh, if you're above 18, put your hand down. So boom, one hand standing, my hand's up. And I remember he says, stand up. And he says, when you think about getting started, whether that's real estate or whatever it may be, we probably all believe that you have the most time. Like, you have the most time, right? You're 15, you have your whole career ahead of you. And everyone's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, do we all think that he has the most time here? Yeah, absolutely. Young. And then he just went on to tell this story about, someone that was close to him that was like 18 or 19 that passed away. And I remember like the whole room, it was like a heartthrob story. He told it, and it just really landed. And I think it's just such a simple story, but it's very effective, right? Because like you say, and we both agree, like we're time billionaires, but no day is guaranteed, right? And I think just like understanding that, and I think about death a lot. I truly do. There's this concept that Robert Greene talks about in his book called confronting your immortality. And it's just this constant, like more so not positive nor negative, but just constant awareness of death. And I think it can be such a motivator if used in a like positive, uplifting way. Like, I don't think about it in like a negative, oh my God way, but a positive like reflection of like, does this argument matter? Like, does this conversation that's not bringing me any ROI, and I feel like I'm being taken away from, like, how can you reduce that? Like, how can you just live a life where you are so focused on not wasting time? Because at the end of the day, as you said, like, it's the most precious asset we all have here. Like, even just last night, I won't mention names, but I saw a friend on social that like one of his dear friends and his girlfriend died in a car crash. And it's just, you get reminders in life when you see that. And I just think it's so easy to think that, oh, like, we're healthy, we're young, we're doing our thing, we're focused on our careers. But, and I'll say I'm very grateful that I haven't had to deal with a lot of loss in my life. Mm-hmm. And maybe the way I speak, maybe people think I would have, just the way I think about death and time and everything. But I think it's more so from the appreciation aspect of it.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Life moves by fast. Be mindful of how you spend your time and who you hang out with. And I think a lot of that ties back to the concept we were talking about earlier, which is you can engineer your own luck, right? Because luck is basically a series of these seeds that you plant. So it's who do you hang out with, your environment you're in. It's what you eat even. Are you exercising? Are you moving? And it's all these little things on our day-to-day basis and how we spend our time and who it's with, they compound years down, right? Yep. Like, it's very tough for us to see now in terms of like where we're going to be in a few years. Like, we can imagine it. Yeah. But it's these significant things that you look back on that you mentioned where it's like, wow, I got this growth or this thing happened
Yep.
because of this one singular event.
Absolutely. And I think just that, like understanding that, right? Like the things you do today, you will see in, 6 months, a year, whatever it may be. I'm a firm believer in that, right? In terms of just you create your own luck by the actions you put in today. And, there's like my girlfriend, Jacqueline Burnett, she always says focus to finish. And her, she's related to David Meltzer, if you're familiar with him. He's an awesome podcast. He's been a mentor of mine for a long time. And just this idea of not, if you could do something today, why wait till tomorrow, right? And whether that's from a simple task like sending someone an email or shooting someone a text or just whatever you feel is the, right thing to do or on your list of tasks to do. And of course, we all go through ebbs and flows of productivity or not. And I'm a huge proponent just in terms of how I spend my time, daily rituals, all that stuff. But yeah, no, I totally agree with what you said.
Tell me more about that. I want to know more about like your daily routine. You're doing 75 hard. You're on day 60.
63.
12 more days, man. You got this. You got this. We're rooting for you.
All I tell myself is one more day. One more day. That's how you got it. That's how you have to be.
Dude, you have to.
And yeah, no, I think just on the topic of 75 hard, for people that maybe aren't familiar, it's a mental toughness program by Andy Frisella. And here's what you got to do every day. You got to do 2 workouts. One has to be outside, 45 minutes each. You have to drink a gallon of water a day. You have to stick to a diet. You have to not drink alcohol, no cheat meals, take an accountability picture, and then read 10 pages every single day of a nonfiction, like business type of book. And I did it once before in 2020 during COVID. And I will say, just not only do you have such a physical transformation, if that's what you're going for, but like the true mental changes and the magnified focus on discipline, just I'll be the first one to say, like, I've never experienced something like it. And it's not even because it's a program, but just the simple things that aren't even business related just transform how you live your life, because you have to if you're committed to it. From the way you manage your time, right? Like today, like we're doing this podcast, and I knew that I had to get both my workouts in before I went on to head out to something after this, where I was gonna have to do it at 11 o'clock at night, which is not ideal, right? And just it gets you so dialed in, and I think just in terms of daily habits, nowadays, or I should say, the past 63 days, I haven't been traveling as much, really at all, and I believe it's been so great because I've just been extremely focused. And doing 75 hard when you're traveling, I think just it adds multiple layers to it that, it can be unpredictable and it's a lot more challenging. But I would say the past 6 months, one thing that I recently added into my daily routine is cold plunge. Are you familiar? Have you done 12 plunges?
Yeah. So I've one in my backyard that I use daily.
Daily?
Yeah.
Love that. So yeah, that's definitely something I usually hit right when I wake up, like first 10 to 20 minutes.
Do you at your gym, or you have it at home? Or
I have it at home.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So it's been I mean, what's your experience with the cold plunges?
Dude, I think it's great because like, especially in the beginning, because it's tough, but I also think ongoing, it's that one thing. It doesn't get easier, by the way. Like anyone who thinks it gets easier or like enjoys it, like,
yeah,
that's not me. Like for me, every single day, I'm like, I don't want to do this, But I think the fact that when you just do it and afterwards you realize like, oh, that wasn't so bad. After you're done with it, it just compounds the rest of your day. If that's how you start your day, right? For me, it's workout and then cold plunge.
Yep.
It just sets the tone for you to have a lot of momentum.
Yeah, I agree. And, to exactly what you said, it never gets easier. You just get better and you become more tolerable. And I think that's with anything in life, right? Like whether that's from managing one employee to managing 10, it doesn't get easier. You just become better. Or you are more prepared, where, it's so funny when you'll see people, even myself, like, get in the cold plunge on video, and some people, they it's very challenging for them. Some people can talk while they're doing it, and it seems easier, even though they've just gotten better. But then when they get out of it, they're like, "Whoa, wow, that was great! Wow, that was awesome!" And everyone's like excited, and it's like the after effects of it.
Yes.
But so many people don't want to do the hard thing, and whether that's from a cold plunge, from people that I know like the mental benefits to the physical benefits, they're just so vast. Where I don't know if you've been listening to Andy Frisella's podcast. Supposedly, which I didn't see this too much, but supposedly he would always make fun of people that did cold plunges or whatever. But recently he started doing it, and I won't butcher what he said on his podcast, and I would highly recommend listening to it. And I'll have to go back and find the exact episode that you can link below. But he did it for like 6 or 7 days in a row, and the way he described how he felt was just transformative, and also just reassuring to how I thought about it and what it meant. So yeah, I mean, not even that people have to do cold plunges, but find something hard to do. And whether that's every day or finding something hard to do as like a big challenge once a year, I think every successful person or people that I deem as successful love doing the hard things, right? Like there's a group of guys that I follow. I know a couple of them personally, like Jesse Itzler and my buddy Devin, who bear crawled a marathon. Right now, I think they started
Bear crawled a marathon. That sounds horrible.
He like broke a Guinness World Record. Bear crawled a marathon, New York City Marathon, I think 2 or 3 years ago.
That's absolutely insane.
And yeah, it's wild. Like I'll have to show you the videos after this. It's wild.
I can't bear crawl for like 10 seconds.
I know.
You know?
It's crazy. 26.2 miles. But right now, him and a couple guys, Jesse Itzler, they're biking across America. I think they started in San Diego today. And I just love all of this like physical endurance, mental training stuff that I've sort of immersed myself in a little bit the past year, where like 2 years ago, I've never ran more than 3 miles. Last year, I really started getting into running. I ran my first marathon last December, and just putting that daunting task like running a marathon on the calendar just truly changed the way I operated. And I think it's so important for entrepreneurs to just chase things that are hard physically. And even like a conversation I was having with a good friend of mine who, I'll say his name, Mark from Iconic, the incredible art brand. He was just saying, wow, man, like he's so on his health game right now. And he's like, dude, if I was only doing this at your age of just, he's older than me, and just the way how dialed in he feels and how not only accomplished, but the way it's like truly changing him. You hear that time and time again. And the fact is health is wealth. And whether that's from just like being healthy or just like putting yourself in these extreme environments, I think it's such a exhilarating thing to do, and just impacts you not only just from a mental perspective, but just in all areas of your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love it. And shout out to the people that are crazy enough to bear crawl marathons and ride their bike across America. We'll get there one day in our own.
Yeah, one day. Maybe
way.
not my bucket list in a different world.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, it's different for everyone.
It's different for everyone.
I mean, and that's the beauty of it, right? Like a daunting thing for someone could be running their first mile, or maybe running a mile under 10 minutes or 7 minutes or whatever it may be. And it's not just these big things. And, now having the experience of running something like a marathon, I interviewed a guy named James Lawrence prior to running my marathon, and he's known as the Iron Cowboy. Are you familiar with him?
No.
This is going to blow your mind. So he set out to break the record of the most Ironmans done over the course of X amount of consecutive days. So the initial record was 5 Ironmans back to back. Are you familiar with Ironman in terms of
Ironman is like the swimming, biking, and running?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like 2.4 mile swim, like 120 mile bike, and then a marathon, 26.2 mile run.
Crazy.
So prior to him going out to break this record, the most consecutive in a row were 5 back to back. So instead of thinking, I'll do 10 or 6, this man does 50 of them back to back in all 50 states. 50 Ironmans, 50 days, 50 states.
50 days.
50 days, one every single day. And to make things better, that was in 2018, 2019. he broke the record again and did 101.
That is insane.
101 Ironmans back to back every single day. That's like, 30% of the year almost, right? And I bring up this and I reference this because I think it's so important in business, in physical endeavors, and just in life. And what I've learned is it's one thing to hear that, right? And to you and I should say 100% of people, that is absurd and crazy. And to think about what it took to do that, you would never want to do it. It would never be on your bucket list. But what he always says, and what he told me when I interviewed him, is just it starts with one step. One step, right? And when you think about it that way, like whether you're running 101 Ironmans or you're running a marathon or you're walking down the street, that journey, however long or small, starts with one step. And I just think that framework of thinking is so powerful, and to the point where, I was asking him during our interview, like, hey, what advice would you have for me when I'm 20 on mile 22, 23 on my marathon? Because I'm going to listen to this. And again, I won't butcher exactly what he said, but he said something along the lines of, you have to just be present. The next step isn't going to kill you. Focus on the next step. And that's where your focus must be. And in a business setting, I think it's similar to that, right? Like, I'm on day 63 to 75 hard. There's only 15 days left, but there's only one missed picture that it takes to fail today, right? There's only one missed minute of you working out for 44 minutes, now 45 minutes that it takes to fail, right? So it's like stressing the small stuff, but understanding the journey you're on, but obsessing over the present is where I believe just the majority of big thinkers, how they think and why they think that way. Because, some people might be taking that first step along a short journey, or others might have that, massive, daunting vision. And I think in business, it's maybe easier to think about versus like the physical is like, oh my God, 101 Ironmans versus like, oh yeah, if you do this in business and then it grows and you hire and, more funding, whatever it may be. It's just two different lanes, but there's so many intersects, I believe, in terms of like the mental framework when it comes to like these big daunting things. So I've committed to run a marathon a year, like for the next 20 years is my goal, just one a year. And if I can do that, I think that's the base of how I want to live. And, we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, that's amazing. Dude, the human mind is just so insane. Because don't get me wrong, I'm sure like physically he's on another level, but like really when you do 101, it's all mental, right? It's literally all mental. So
yep.
I'm curious in terms of like how you can apply that same framework to like business, right? Because because the mind is just so strong and crazy. Imagine like just taking that same framework and like applying it to any different area. It's not necessarily physical to achieve that 0.0001% success. So
yeah, I mean, even the way that he says it, he talked about, because he's by no means, and he says this himself, like the most physically fit guy. And matter of fact, to make when he says stuff like this, I don't even understand it. To make things worse, I forgot to mention this. He ran on a fractured leg for 95 days.
Dude.
And at what point it's like, at what point is that not even healthy, but like the mind, like he had this carbon fiber leg brace and just what they were doing to make sure for him to make sure he succeeded, and the mental toughness that had to go into that. It's hard to comprehend, but again, it's how I relate to it. And again, some of these things we're saying, it's like simple to understand, but to really apply it, it's like he just kept going and he never quit, right? If he falls off his bike on day 97 and passed out because he's exhausted, like he just kept going like that. And it's very challenging to do, but the most successful people in the world either know when to quit and not quit, but just shift and pivot. But yeah, they keep going. And I think it's so cool just to even have a conversation about it of like, what does it take to get to that place where you have that level of mental toughness? And it's the build of experiences, from
Yeah.
a business perspective of, different ventures and how they lead to the next to, how running your first mile leads to running a marathon, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to experience the things that you get to experience to then learn what it takes and to realize either how close or how far you are from your desired outcome of how you want to think and how you want to, take action on things.
Yeah. It's this was a thought I was thinking about the other day, which is it's simple but not easy. Which is right, we all know what it
Yeah.
takes to lose weight, to get in a good shape, right? You go to the gym, you eat healthy,
Yeah.
you eat below your caloric maintenance, right, in terms of
Yep.
calories. But it's tough for a lot of people to lose weight, right? Everyone's always trying to find the quick shortcut. And if
Yep.
you really think about these thoughts and ideas, it's simple, not easy. Even in business, you get distracted by these different business opportunities. You get distracted by this, or you're focusing on the wrong problem. Be it,
Yep.
the root cause is right there. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's spot on.
yeah, cool. I want to talk more about the business side with you. I know we covered a lot on the podcast.
Yeah.
Tell me more about media kits. I know you had an acquisition as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, would love to learn
Yeah,
more.
absolutely. No, I'll tell the story of really how it led up. So,
Yeah.
and I mentioned it briefly, but for the people again, so Media Kits was a software that allowed creators of all kinds, podcasters, musicians, just social media creators, to create a media kit with real-time data and analytics. So what is a media kit? It's sort of a digital resume where if you want to pitch yourself to a brand, they typically ask for a media kit. And in order to do that, you usually have to, create one on Canva or Photoshop. And what really led to this idea was back in 2018 when I was first meeting my now co-founder, Kieran. We were good friends. His good friend Jeff Garage, big automotive YouTuber that lived in DC, and he knew we were both in the marketing space. And he came to us one day and said, "Hey, Pennzoil reached out to me. They asked me for my media kit. Can you guys make me one? Because I want to share it with them right away, and I don't have one." So we make him one on Canva. We spend probably an hour or two making it look pretty, asking for his social media analytics, screenshotting them, or we're just making it look good. Send it to him, and he gets the deal. And then 3 weeks later, he comes back to us and says, "Hey guys, Ferrari reached out to me. They asked me for my media kit. Can you go update my media kit because everything you sent is now outdated. I grew 100,000 subscribers. I've changed all my pictures. This is my most recent video, the whole thing." So we're like, sure. So we fix it up for him, and we're changing like 1s to 2s and 3s to 4s. And that's really when we asked ourselves, why isn't there a way for creators to create a media kit that never gets outdated, that you can easily share with a brand through a link in real time? And on the flip side, why isn't there a way for brands to view verified and trusted data from these creators? And there really wasn't anything out there like that. And back in 2018, when we had this idea, we were just about to move to Arizona. I was still in high school. We didn't have really the experience to go like launch a tech product. Like I didn't know anything about tech or SaaS. So we ended up shelving the idea. And I think it speaks to, just as you said, like planting the seeds. That was a seed, an idea that we had that we did not execute on at the time. Fast forward to 2020, living in Arizona for a year and a half now. Kieran and I are now roommates. And we started seeing TikTok like really starting to blow up, where like these, the creator economy is thriving. Podcasters, TikTokers, we like to say you were seeing these TikTok creators being like minted overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw them and we're like, hey, like, let's go. Like, this is a time for us to just not only commit to this, but we just see it as a market opportunity. So the first, I should say, like, middle 6 months, or from the middle of 2020 to the end of 2020, those 6 months, it was just us bootstrapping it, sort of ideating on this product, kind of figuring out the business model, getting thoughts from different creators, asking them for feedback before we even had a product. And then over the course of that 6 months, like our conviction just kept getting more and more and more, to the point where we were coming into 2021 and we're like, hey, let's take this serious. So to build the product how we wanted to, we had to go raise money. And it was my first time raising any type of outside capital.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, through the podcast, I had some incredible people in my network to not only help fundraising, but to genuinely be a guiding light. There's one mentor that and really friend of mine that I always love to give a big shout out to. who his name's Aristotle Loomis. I met him through Stephen Galanis, who is the CEO of Cameo, and Aristotle's just such the definition of what I believe a true mentor is. Someone that is there for you every step of the way, someone that is there for you any time of the day, someone that will like get their hands dirty, whether that's by helping you craft an email to just, what to say on a phone call, like all of the stuff that people might look for in terms of like what a true mentor is. But back to the story of, we went out to fundraise in 2021, and it wasn't, by no means was it easy at all. It took us over 6 months to raise our pre-seed round of funding, raised just over $1.5 million from 37 different angel investors.
Wow.
And, there's so many lessons that we can dive into about like fundraising, thoughts, experience, but it was my first time fundraising, period. Learned so much about, corporate structure, to fundraising vehicles, to, whether we wanted to, hopefully talk to a fund or do angel investors. But throughout those 6 months, January 2021 to like July, June, July, that 6 month period, it was a rolling close. Took us a while to get it done. Finally launched the product in August of 2021. And, before we launched, we had a team of 7 full-time employees, 3 engineers, Kieran and I, COO, and then marketing. Someone was helping with marketing, and just that journey. And I paused before launch because then we can talk about launch and the journey of the product itself. But just looking back, it's always so easy looking back to connect the dots. And one of my favorite quotes is from Steve Jobs. He says, you can always connect the dots looking forward, but never looking backwards. So trust in that the actions that you're doing, and, I'll butcher it a little bit, but just trust in yourself that the actions you're doing today will be connected somehow, some way. And, that was the origin of idea of Media Kits, the fundraising process that we can dive into if you'd like to. And then, we'll get into the journey itself of Media Kits, but it was crazy.
Yeah. Cool. So tell me more about the fundraising, right? Like what made you decide on angel investing versus fund, and like that whole process in terms of like how you're just meeting and pitching investors.
Yeah. So as mentioned, first time fundraising, I really got the whole just playbook of what is fundraising, why to do it, fundraising structures. And there was one person that, I should say there's 2 people that really not only helped, and I brought up one of them, but someone that was one of the first investors in Media Kits. Are you familiar with the brand Fuck Jerry?
Yes.
So the founders of Fuck Jerry, Ben Kaplan, Eli.
I know Ben.
Okay. Yeah, sweet.
Small world.
So Ben, he was one of the first people that really believed in the product. And like Ben is so incredible as a friend, as a partner investor, and just, going back to the point that we talked about earlier of, before you even get to this idea of pitching and all this stuff, having, that quality network that I did at the time, it was less about pitching, but just sharing an opportunity and getting thoughts from people. And of course, sharing that, yes, you are fundraising. But the playbook for us was, simple, right? Not easy, simple.
Yep.
I have so many people in my network. You have so many people in your network, Kieran. Like, let's just, the key is putting meetings in the calendar and creating that momentum. Like any fundraise is all about momentum, right? Like the hardest check to get in the door is the first one. And across the 20 or 37, I believe it was, angel investors, on the small end, it was $15,000 checks to average like $25,000 to $50,000 checks, and then a couple $100,000, $150,000 checks. And in 2021, the venture capital market was in such a different space than it is today. And I think not only was it great timing for us, but just I'm grateful to have been in that environment to then now see both sides of it in terms of, either the lack of funding or the abundance of funding, like it was in 2021 to different creator tools or Web3, whatever it may be. But the fundraising process, there's so many pros and cons of it, right? Like my co-founder Kieran, we were both co-founders, co-CEOs, and it was us spending a lot of our time fundraising when we're obviously still focused on building the team, and actually doing a lot of the grassroots marketing ourselves and hiring, and like really getting the product to where it needs to be, from managing the development team. And you quickly realize just how much of a time constraint it is on the actual business. And I think that was not only a huge takeaway, but it's just for any fundraiser, it's such a long process. And of course, as you do it, you get better. Maybe you can shorten that time frame down for sure. But for us to raise the 1.5, it was just, to get the 37 yeses, probably had to do 200 meetings, right? Or 150 meetings. And
Wow.
to schedule those out across 6 months, highly, busy people, it just takes time.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful for the experience. And moving to launch, we launched August 11th, 2021, when the first user could actually sign up for media kits. And for context, and I mean there's so much to learn in here, is we had this big launch party. One of our investors is a mentor of mine, Dan Fleischman, who incredible angel investor. He does a lot of these events called elevator nights, where they're free events. He'll bring a couple hundred people together, have these world-class speakers, do them at his studio down in downtown LA, Elevator Studio. We partnered up to do a launch party, and it turned out to be such a incredible way to launch a product like media kits, because we did sort of party / networking event / speakers on panels, and we ended the night with Wiz Khalifa performing, and we had 700 creators there. We had some awesome speakers, from Tanner Fox to these incredible TikTokers to Dan and David Meltzer, and just all these great people. And for me as a co-founder, there was no other way I wanted to launch the product than to just core people in my life. And it's one thing to DM 600 people that I have met over the years that are creators and say, hey, I would love to have you try this out, versus bringing them to an event, bringing everyone together, energy's high, cool launch party. And of course there was a budget associated with that, with whether that's Wiz Khalifa or the event itself, and just to make it a great event. And the event was great, and it was a phenomenal time, and it was such, in my eyes, it kind of put the brand on the map and the product. But on the back end, and what people don't see is when you're trying to, I remember so vividly, Kieran and I, the day that we're heading to the event, we're scrambling to get the website finalized, against the clock, because having an event and then trying to match up development timeline to it can be challenging. Things are usually more expensive and take longer, and it was just sort of one of those things where we just need to get this product out there. And it we kind of came down to the wire of launching, which then led to so many bugs and crashes. And long story short, the event probably resulted in probably even the week after it, 1,000 signups, which maybe some people think is great. Obviously for us, it was sort of a bummer, right? 1,000 signups, free product. Some people aren't coming back. The site's crashing, everything. And there was this 2-3 month period, or I should say 2 month period, August, September, where it was just sort of flatlined, and we were just figuring it out, truthfully. We were trying to fix the product. We had some users actually using the tech, sharing it, and really, being a power user in a way. And slowly but surely, I should say our team, we just became obsessed with how I deem organic grassroots marketing, where a couple key things that we did that resulted in the first 10,000 signups for users on media kits. Two things. One was just organic TikTok content, showcasing some of the creators and investors that we had, like Josh Richards, who's 25 million followers on TikTok, and showing his media kit, to showing Wiz Khalifa's media kit in fun, creative ways, which resulted in tons of organic signups on TikTok. And then two, it's so great. One of the guys that invested in media kits, I'll say his name because he's just such an incredible venture capitalist, Peter Liu from Revelry Ventures. His brother was working for media kits, and he's younger than me, and he told us about Twitch and how not told us about Twitch, but told us how there's so many creators that are just so die hard in the Twitch community, where that led to us launching our Twitch integration. And when we launched our Twitch integration, which then you could connect your Twitch account, showcase all your Twitch data, so then Twitch streamers could then share it with a brand. I just started going very deep into the Twitch community on Twitter, we started doing all these cool giveaways, like, hey, we're gifting subscriptions, which is, like a $5 donation or like monthly subscription to these different Twitch streamers. And we ended up growing just from like those two outlets. And of course, I'm missing some of the things like email, whatever it may be. From September to the new year, we got over 10,000 users, like organic, no paid media, like all grassroots stuff. And then 3 months following that, so January, February, March, leading into 2022, we hit over 25,000 users using the product.
Wow.
And at that time, it was direct to creator tool, meaning a creator can sign up for a media kit on mediakits.com, create their media kit, share it with the brand. But we were getting so much interest from the B2B side. So talent agencies, record labels that say, hey, a creator of mine or a musician of mine sign up for media kits. I have 10 other people that I manage. How can I create 10 media kits in one central location to then share my catalog of talent? So we ended up building out a whole B2B model, which like WME Sports and Taylor Gang, Atlantic Records, and a handful of different management companies were then building 10, 20, 50 different media kits for their talent rosters so that they could easily share, hey, here's 10 creators across our talent roster, all their real-time data. If I send it to you today, it'll be the same and accurate data in 3 months, right? Because so many agents and just the whole creator space, it's all about speed, speed to see the data, to close a deal. Like it's, and especially with talent agents, right? It's like go, go, go. Where, one of the key problems that we wanted to solve is just the simplicity of sharing data in real time and not having to worry about it. Because if I share something with you today about my podcast or whatever it may be, it's a pain to go back every month, every 3 months, every 6 months and just update something. It's so mundane, especially if you don't have a team doing that.
Yeah.
But that led us to like early 2022. And then we really came to like the next phase, in my opinion. And mind you, like the journey of Media Kits, it's so crazy looking back because from start of like launching the product, of course, there were like 6-8 months build up before launching in terms of the fundraising and ideation and everything. But from launching August 2021, we got acquired just over 12 months later at the end of August 2022. And bring us back to early 2022, we came to a point where we were thinking about the next fundraise. Like, hey, let's go raise our official seed round. We were making tons of great progress. We ended up getting, we locked in a lead investor. And this was over the course of like 3-4 months. And I'll skip over a lot just for the sake of timing and everything. But we came to the point where we were so deep in the fundraising zone, had all this momentum. We're building the team and, there's so many different hiccups and problems and things you're trying to solve in the early days of finding product market fit and building momentum in a small startup. When simply the CEO of a company called Viral Nation reached out to me on LinkedIn, and I was familiar with Viral Nation. Funny enough, I saw them like a week before the CEO reached out, just in the press, and just I was familiar with the brand, and that was the company that ended up acquiring us in September of 2022 after going out to Toronto, meeting the team in person, like building the relationship with all the executives over there. And mind you, they're a team of 400 people. They raised a big round of private equity. This is all public info. They raised like $200 million private equity, 250 Canadian. They're in Canada.
Yeah.
And it's just something that when it came to the decision of going down the acquisition route or not only did it feel so right from the way the product fit into their ecosystem of they manage thousands of creators exclusively. We can fit our talent roster product directly into them. They do influencer marketing at scale for some of the biggest brands in the world to be able to use a tool with the creators that they work with. And, I'll pause there because I don't know what direction you want to go in from here, but the journey of Media Kits, and I'll summarize it with this, is just, in my eyes, the ability to learn from start to grow to scale to exit from a fundraising perspective, from a team perspective, and to do that in 12 months, I'm so grateful for it. But the amount of lessons, mind you, and going back to the beginning of the podcast, like, I didn't go to college. I don't have a business degree, right? It's just, I've learned so much the past, 12, 18 months throughout that journey that in my opinion is the foundational element of how I am going into, this next journey of my career. And just my life overall in terms of the lessons and the people I did it with. And yeah, it was quite the journey.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And the fact that you're doing this or have done it and you're still just 22, which is like when people graduate college,
Yeah,
is
usually.
is insane. And so I'm sure you've learned a lot along the way. So I guess what's next, right? Like, do you want to start more businesses? Do you want to have more time to double down on your podcast? Like,
Yeah.
what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, there's a beauty in the unknown. And right now it's absolutely doubling down on the podcast. I know we talked about it a little bit prior to the show today, but I've always been fascinated with not only podcasting, but podcast tech, and to be building tools in that space. Where right now I recently launched a product, I'll talk about it, called listener.fm. And it's to help podcasters save time in the post-production process. It's using AI. You simply drop in an audio file, and it, as of now, spits out titles, descriptions, show notes, so many different types of assets and content that you can use to save time and make your life easier as a podcaster, or if you're a podcast network that manages shows. So spending a lot of time there, of course, spending time on the podcast. And, one thing that I will say I'm just excited about is angel investing, like venture capital as a whole. I think from just over the years, seeing different deals come across my table and learning, what I did in terms of our fundraising process, very interested in, one day raising a fund and just, pursuing that.
Yep.
So we'll see.
Nice. And the AI, especially with how hot AI is right now, and as more and more people have podcasts, it's like what you said. It's instead of having to pay a full-time person, having to listen to timestamps or figure out how to edit shorts even,
Yeah.
right? Like if that could all be automated through AI, that'd be insane.
Yeah. And, I think, of course, there's so much buzz around AI, and I'm not a technical person. I'm building this product with a really good friend of mine. And I think it's such a important question to ask yourself is like, am I fit to build this product? And whatever business it is, right? Like, if you are solving a key problem that you're having, I believe you can be so much more convinced and bought in on it. Meaning with Listener, we were talking about this before, like I use the product that we've built in the beta form that it is, like very early stage, bootstrapping, 2 people, myself and an engineer. I use it every single episode that I put out because it saves me time, and it works, and it's simple. And I just think that mentality is a recipe for success. Same thing for media kits, right? Like I was pitching my podcast to different brands, or even pitching it to different people. Sometimes I'd reach out to someone that has an agent and was like, hey, thanks for reaching out. Send us over your media kit for you or your show. And I've dealt with media kits for so long prior to, or even just people reaching out to me when we were starting media kits saying like, hey, my name's Jessica, here's my media kit. Take a look. If you want to have me on the show, let me know. Or, booking agents would always send over media kits. So I think just by having like industry experience and what like venture capitalists say, like founder market fit is such an important question, and kind of how I think about this next phase of my journey of like, what have I learned, and, what resources, tools, people do I have access to that I can pour, all of this experience or newfound experience and knowledge into. And right now I'm, it's into Listener FM. So that's where I'm spending time, and I'm super excited about it.
That's amazing. I want to wrap up going back to the podcast because you've interviewed so many people, right? And so I have a few questions here just to wrap out about your guests,
for sure.
right? So having interviewed over 400 very successful people, what would you say is the one common denominator, maybe there's multiple, that you've seen across all of your guests and why they're successful?
I would say, one thing that, and I said it earlier, and this won't be the key answer, is of course the keep going and never quit. Like that's something that every guest that I've had on the show, if I take a step back and look at a guest from afar and say, did they keep going through adversity? Yes. Did they simply not quit when they should have? Like so many stories that you hear, like every logical person that is not in the building entrepreneurial mentality like would simply quit, and they didn't. So that's one side of it. If I was to, really seek for a new answer, I just think that as someone that truly loves the art of a story, right? Like I just read Richard Branson's biography. I'm always listening to podcasts, not of just like podcasts, but people that are interviewing people, hearing stories. I am obsessed with the art of a story, the art of what led someone to doing something and just the journey of that, because it's so easy to look at the end result of someone or something. And like even today, right? This is the context and this will all come full circle to the answer. You see someone like Jeff Bezos and Amazon, and you're like, how do you build a company like that? Like that's oh my
Insane.
insanity. And today I met someone that's actually a user of Listener FM, and I won't say his name, but we were just catching up, first time meeting, and he was like, we were talking about fun fact, right? So he was one of, if not the first, like affiliate of Amazon, and he said that like Jeff Bezos reached out to him when he became the first affiliate of something like way, way, way back in the day. And he has this email and he sent him a t-shirt and he was like very personal and just like wanted to get his experience. And just, you hear that and you're just like, wow, like the stories of what led to greatness sometimes go unheard unless you're someone like you or I or whoever just that like really seeks to understand the journey. Where, if I were to now answer the question, the biggest thing that I've learned is just not only that everyone has a story, but the story is everything. The journey of taking that one step and like figuring it out. It's like the beauty of everything is no one ever had it figured out until quote unquote they did, right? Like it's so easy to look at all of the people that you see on social and you see this glamorized version of success or their journey, or it's easier, you can do it fast, whatever it may be. But you look at the most successful, whether that's billionaires, whatever it may be, however you deem success, and you just realize like we all started somewhere, and most of the time people started in worse conditions than you did, whether that's from where they were from or just their backgrounds or just the lack of family in their life, whatever it may be. And I just think that not only is that such a big takeaway for me, but it just reminds me of like, wow, like be obsessed with the journey, because you can't obsess over the outcome. Because if you told Jeff Bezos in the late 90s of where Amazon would be today, like not only yes, he would believe it, but he couldn't focus on, Amazon Alexa in the late 90s,
Yeah.
right? Like you have to focus on the task at hand. And that is what creates the opportunity for greatness, is by focusing on the task at hand and, putting in the effort day in and day out. And I would say is the biggest takeaway for me.
Nice. I want to kind of do like a quick shot clock of specific guests that you've interviewed to kind of wrap up. So you've interviewed Elon Musk's mom. What would you say was the big thing in her parenting in terms of like how do you create Elon Musk?
Yeah. It's so that interview was so great, because I think when you think about that, like exactly what you just said, right? Elon Musk, such a character. You think about him as this man, but his mother, right? The woman who raised him and his circle of influence, like, that set the foundation of who he is and his story and his childhood and everything. And I think one of my biggest takeaways from her is just, they were coming from South Africa, traveling a lot. Dad wasn't around much. Like they just had this, just such a strong family unit across Tosca, his sister, and his brother Kimball, where, I think it's sometimes, especially in family, it's like, one sibling does this and one sibling does that. And, they're all spread across, they have their own priorities in life. And it seemed that her and, the Musk's family was just so like locked in and aligned and like such a family unit. And I think that was just like a high level takeaway without having to like really try to dig deep into that interview.
Yeah. That's, the thought I just got because you're talking about family and like that core value and principle. I think that's so underrated. So I was just at a mastermind this past weekend in Cabo, and it was a room of 150 different business owners, and there was a section where everyone broke out in groups, and so they pair you basically with people in your specific revenue range. And so there was two tables out of like, I don't know, like 30 tables, I'd say, or like 25 tables, two tables specifically. And those two tables had all of like the 8-figure entrepreneurs, like people who were doing over $1 million a month. And there were only, I don't know, like 7 people in the whole out of 150 who were in that upper echelon. 4 out of those 7 companies were the founders were husband and wife. It was very interesting because my COO pointed it out to me, and I thought it was an interesting topic. But as I think about it more, and as you just brought up the family aspect, I'm like, it's just so key because you need that like selfless environment. You need that loyalty, that bonding, because like I think it's very easy to grow up in this world and you kind of just go on your own path, right? Like especially I think it's like it's almost like maybe glorified is not the right word, but it's like, hey, the moment you're 18, you have to become independent. You're on your own, right? But I think that the people who are achieving a lot of success, you have to find that group, whether that's your current family, whether that's a friend group that really uplifts and supports you, because it's hard enough to get to from point A to point B, let alone trying to do it alone. Like it's very tough. So
you're spot on. And I think that's speaks to like Mae Musk as a woman and how she raised the kids, and like they're all doing so many great things in their own right. And I think it just speaks to like, how can you find your family, whether that's your like actual family or things like masterminds of people that you trust, that you can be vulnerable with, that you can, treat like family, as in like you would do anything for them, you would take a bullet for them. Like, where's that pack? And I think that's so important as a man, as a leader, as in business, or, even just, I know, like, for example, I ran my marathon by myself, didn't know anyone. I guarantee you, and I hopefully I will do this year, if I had a group of guys running it in the race with me, there's that level of like pushing yourself more as a collective, right? That I think is so key in any aspect, that I think that interview for sure speaks to.
Yeah. Okay, so Robert Greene, you've also interviewed. Robert is basically the king of psychology. He's written books like The 48 Laws of Power, Art of Seduction. What were your big takeaways from your meeting with Robert Greene? Like how does someone just know human nature so well?
Yeah, it's so cool because I've loved his books for years, and I met him through drama at an event, and then I interviewed him online in 2020, and then more recently, like we've stayed connected throughout that time, like phone calls. Like I consider Robert a good friend in terms of someone that if I want to ask him a question about relationships or whatever it is, like he'll pick up, and I'm grateful for that. And more recently, I got to sit down with him in person at his house like 3 months ago, and like really do like an hour and a half sit down interview. And he's just incredible. First of all, like his lifestyle is so unique, where like before even answering your question directly, like after the interview, he brought me into his writing room, and he's not doing the most, and he's not doing that well. He's just sitting in certain chairs, and he had a stroke, or I think two strokes over the course of the last handful of years, where he's conscious of his time. He's had death scares, all this stuff. But we go into his writing room, and this may be out there, but he hand writes every single page of a new book that he writes, hand writes it, and then transcribes it by reading it out loud onto, his Mac or whatever it may be, because he can't type. And just, it kind of brought me back a step where, I spent a lot of time on my phone or in emails, doing texts or in phone calls. And when you read a book such as 48 Laws of Power, I heard this one time where it's like you can read a book and you can read a chapter and it could be a quick, easy breeze and you learn something. But when you read a Robert Greene book, it's so dense and you truly can appreciate either how much time or thought or energy went into cultivating the literature in which he writes. And then seeing the other side of it of like his process, from handwriting his work to then taking the chapter, which then leads to like 150 note cards of research prior to getting to the point where he's handwriting it, and then just his room and the surroundings of pictures and memories and no like true technology, and just how he immerses himself for literally, no joke, like 12 to 18 hours a day just writing. Like,
Wow.
he's not on social media. His team's building his team's posting all this stuff. He's just writing. Like when he works on a book, he works on it for 4 or 5 years, and it is his life. Like his life, every waking hour outside of eating and just doing the life stuff, and maybe trying to go on a walk here and there. He's just so in it, and I think it speaks to why he is so great, but just his obsession with human nature, and even outside of his work ethic and how he works. One of the biggest things about the 48 Laws of Power is like it can be very manipulative and people say dangerous. And I think the biggest lesson that Robert says that I have taken away is, it's a book where if used wrong, the lessons that you can manipulate people, you can be a bad human if you use these powers or 48 Laws of Power, if you use the power for negative reasons. But it's about how can you equip yourself to know when people are trying to take advantage of you, to know where people are trying to just be, to do things that you wouldn't even recognize in terms of like the law of human nature. So yeah, he's one of my favorite authors, and even just his influence on me has led me to really immersing myself in stoicism as a whole. Ryan Holiday, who's more of like one of his mentees, is another great author who I love his work. I actually had him on the show like way longer ago, like in the early days of the show, and I really want to have him on again. But just everything stoicism, life, death, laws of human nature. I think it's so important from just understanding it, but also in business, right? Like in relationships. I always tell people, no matter what business you're in the people business. And of course, like things change with AI in terms of what people can or can't do, and in terms of how things are automated. But you're forever going to be dealing with people, and understanding his work, I think, just gives you an advantage in life.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I know quite a lot of people, but I would say Robert Greene is the one guy I can say where I'm like, I'm a fan of this guy, like just a full on like fan. So hopefully I meet him one day. He's like, because when you read, it's like what you said, when you read those books, it's like, how did you even distill it into these 48 laws? Like how did you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just crazy. Like anyone who's read his books. So
yeah, and the density, and just to see like he still has like original note cards from like the learning process and like the discovery process of all of his books. Like he's opening all these things, and you can just see the the decades and just that went into what deems his now as a success. And I don't know if people know this, but like he was a like nothing writer until his like late 30s, and he had no success. He didn't like the 48 Laws of Power didn't come out until I think he was like early 40s. Like he's struggled a lot in his early career to then now see how like mainstream and how successful his books have been. I think it just speaks to our whole conversation about just one foot in front of the other, and like all of his experiences and that journey led for him to be able to distill these lessons and laws into the words that he did. And I think it's so powerful. But he's someone that is just the most like, he's so committed to his craft that it's undeniable or unbelievable just to see, how he does what he does.
Yeah.
So yeah, shout out to Robert Greene.
Shout out to Robert Greene, man. So you were basically one of the last people to interview Larry King before he passed away. Would love to learn more about like what your takeaways with Larry was as well.
Yeah. So the Larry King story, it's so quite shocking how it came about looking back. So just the brief was I ended up interviewing Tillman Fertitta, who owner of the Houston Rockets,
Yep.
and he was promoting his book. I had him on the show. I got invited to this dinner in Beverly Hills at the Mastro's location, which Tillman owns. It was like 20 or 30 different people that helped promote his book, podcasters, creators, whatever it may be. And I ended up meeting this guy named Chance King at this dinner, who happened to be Larry King's son. And before I get into what led up or what I learned from Larry, I think it's just so important to have the context. Met Chance at this event. The following weekend, I was hosting an event with Drama, Robert Greene, or not Robert Greene, this with Rob Dyrdek, Drama, like all these cool people. Ended up inviting Chance to it. We became friends, just hit it off. And sometimes it's just, you can't predict these things. The following week, I'm walking around Century City Mall and I'm about to leave with my girlfriend and a friend and Kieran. And as I'm about to leave, guess who comes strolling around the corner because he's in a wheelchair? Larry King passes me at this mall a week after I met his son. And it's just one of those moments you're like, are you kidding me? Like, I've always wanted to interview Larry King. I've written that in my journal for years. Happened to meet his son coincidentally, and I ended up just turning around, going up to him, just introducing myself, saying, "Oh my God, like I met your son Chance. Just wanted to say I admire you and your work." Got a quick picture to send it to Chance, and it was just like a cool moment, right? And that led to around, I should say this was like November or October. Yeah, October 2019 is when this was all happening. And, I don't typically, I'm not the one to say, like, oh, can you get this interview for me? Like, ask, oh, do this. Like, can you help me get this interview in a sense? But it was just one of those times where it just felt so natural, right? Like, given Larry's age and just, he didn't do podcasts a lot. I figured I'd ask. And Chance ended up saying, he wasn't doing too all the time, coming out of a stroke. He couldn't do it at the time. And then fast forward to Thanksgiving, I always try to text people that I care about or that I think of and just say, happy Thanksgiving. We ended up texting that day in November 2020 or 2019. And it was just kind of circled back. And he was like, hey, by the way, I spoke with my dad again. He's doing better. He said he'd love to do the show. Let me know when you'll be in LA next and we'll schedule it. And I was still living in Arizona. And I was like, I'll be there in the next 2 weeks. And we ended up scheduling the show December 10th, 2019. And looking back, it was just crazy timing because that was really one of the only, if not based on what I know, like the last interview he really did in his studio, because then, Christmas or holidays and then New Year's and then like COVID early 2020.
Yeah.
And someone like him who was 87 years old, he was not doing anything, not seeing anyone. And the day he passed, I remember it so vividly. I remember waking up and like a handful of friends were texting me like, oh my God, do you see the news? And, it's one thing to, I thought of my friend Chance who just lost his dad and just how hurt he must be. And, Chance is my age, 22 now, 23, his dad, 87. It must be so hard, right? Like you have so much life ahead of you. And outside of just like the loss itself, just that interview meant so much to me because like the context of I was 19, Larry King's 87, it's like a 67-year age gap. The context of him being born in 1933, me being born in the year 2000, and us being in these similar but way different fields of like he's the the godfather of journalism, interviewing, all that stuff, and I'm just like young podcaster that wants to do this for like the foreseeable future. It was just such a moment of clarity and reassurance of just being that 17-year-old kid in my bedroom walking around with a pair of Apple headphones to then sitting down with Larry King in his office. It just really not only proved to me but just reassured. And I think so many people, and I should say we all have these moments in life where, or hopefully you would have one day where you were just reassured that what you're doing like is right and to keep going and you have like a positive sign. And like that interview with Larry King was that times 1,000. And, to the main point, one of the biggest lessons I learned from him, and I said the one thing earlier about the quote I live by is just, he says, I've never learned anything while I was talking, to just focus on being a great listener. But outside of that, I asked Larry the question. I said, what makes people great? Because he interviewed like every single, like throughout his career, like every president while he was doing, these interviews, from athletes to entertainers, like the biggest people in the world, right? So I was like, what makes people great? And he said, greatness is driven. Like, those who are great are always the most driven. And just, of course, it's one thing to hear, but when when I referenced that not Larry King, the Robert Greene story, and someone that's his age that's so driven to write and pour his heart into these different novels, like you just realize that simple statement of drive, meaning just pouring your heart and soul into what you do and to being committed to it, it's just so apparent in terms of what creates greatness and what creates that opportunity for greatness. And I think that's a very not only valuable insight that I learned, but something that always I think about when I think about that interview with Larry King. And more so just he was so present, right? Like people sometimes people that have interviews, or maybe you meet someone at an event, sometimes you can notice people like aren't making eye contact, they're busy, their head's somewhere else. And like you just know, right?
Yeah,
like
you know.
like they have things that are going on, like nothing I can do right now will maybe like zone them in.
Like, should we postpone?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And you could just, it was a different level of presence with him that it just, looking back, I could feel the decades of presence and just greatness was just sitting right in front of me. And even looking back, like, I get the chills, and I'm like, wow, like that was just, it was such a surreal moment from like the morning of like, I'm interviewing Larry King today, this is crazy, to then like being present in that moment with him for 45 minutes. Like I can still picture it so vividly. It's
yeah.
And I'm, just to like wrap up the point, I'm so grateful for it. It gave me so much reassurance of like the path you're on, like one foot in front of the other, like stick to it. And I'll go back a lot and like watch those clips, because, not only Larry King and the passing, but it just reminds you that, one day every single person I've ever interviewed will not be here anymore. And same thing for me, right? So it just speaks to the value and, the dedication to the craft of wanting to have great conversations, to create these, like time capsules of storytelling that Larry King has done so well over the decades that he did it. And yeah, it's definitely one of the, if not the most, like cherished interview I've done.
Yeah, that's amazing. Cool. Well, I feel like we covered so much in terms of just everything all around. And I think that's a great high point to wrap it up. So I appreciate you coming on today's podcast.
Absolutely.
And dude, I'm just hearing your story really motivates me too, to really push on this podcast. But hearing like, the stories of people you've interviewed and stuff, like it's your purpose is just so much more. And I think I'm excited to see this next chapter for you in terms of like what you're going to tackle next. So
thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me here.